Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our next installment of Lindsay Bird in Writing is Hard. Today's interview is with Claire Barner, and we look at not just the development of her upcoming book, but also specific questions relating to craft, finding and working with a sensitivity reader, and journey to publication. I hope you enjoy! Hi, everybody. Today I am joined by the wonderful Claire Barner. Claire is a 2025 debut author, and she studied public policy and education at the University of Chicago. She spent her career in operations, and she's currently a leader in the parent engagement group at her children's school and is committed to enhancing equity at Chicago Public Schools. Her debut novel, Moon Rising, is out on the 8th of July, 2025, and the back of book blurb reads, in 2073, controversial agronomist Dr. Alex Cole has dedicated her life to mutagenic food, the only solution to feeding a world torn apart by climate change. When fierce opposition from radical environmentalists wipe out her lab funding, a surprising lifeline appears in the form of Mansour Al-Kabi, a charismatic Amati businessman who needs a sustainable food supply for his guests on the moon's first hotel. Alex moves to the moon colony with Mansour, and they immediately dive into the challenging work. As she smuggles in illegal chickens, fights a vexing tomato fungus, and dreams of olive groves on the moon, Alex is surprised to find herself falling in love not just with the lunar colony, but with Mansour, whose vision for the future of the moon extends far beyond luxury hotels. Back on Earth, eccentric genius Victor Beard and Mansour's younger brother Rashid fight to push the Homestead Act through Congress. Without the support of the U.S. government, they'll never be able to achieve their goal to relocate humanity to the moon and secure a second chance for life on Earth. When eco-terrorists threaten the lunar colony, Alex, Mansour, Victor, and Rashid must choose what they're willing to die for and what they're really willing to live for. Is it their grandiose visions of saving the planet, or is it each other? So, just to get us started, I'm not sure if you had a bit of foresight while you were writing this book, but I do feel like there's a lot of stuff in our current events that can be found in this sci-fi. How did you feel as things were coming out when this book was
Yeah,
approaching?
this it's so interesting. I first came up with the idea for this book about 12 years ago now, so it was a long time. And I think it is a positive vision of a future. It's only 50 years in the future, and it has a lot of collaboration between NASA and private space entrepreneurs, and there is tension there, right? But it is collaborative, right? It is not. It is very different than what's going on currently with the Trump administration. However, I did get a chance to kind of finalize the book after the events of November of last year. And so I do think as I was doing my last edits and my last read, I was thinking through like how is this going to feel reading this 6 months into the Trump administration. And I did make some tweaks to make it feel even more salient. So for example, there's a plague that happens about 10 years before the events of this story. And I kind of tweaked it a little bit to be making it caused basically by deregulation at the FDA. And right after I wrote that, I heard a newscast on NPR kind of talking about deregulation at the FDA. And so I do think it very much is timely and doesn't read as too optimistic in the current age, but also I think ultimately this book is uplifting and it makes you feel optimistic about kind of humanity's future, which definitely is something we need right now.
No, absolutely. And I think with sci-fi especially, there's a temptation for people who aren't very familiar with the genre to be like, oh, it's all nonsense, futuristic stuff. But much of sci-fi is really talking about current events or things that we're actually seeing and we're just creating in a more fantastical way. I mean, if you started this 10 or 12 years ago, the climate change discussion was already well underway at that point. What were you looking at when you first were exploring that topic as far as like creating this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, it's important to have your book grounded in characters and grounded in kind of real situations that you believe in. And so very much this book does not have a lot of sci-fi jargon. There's no aliens. The science is very realistic. And I think when it comes to climate change, I actually wanted to be as realistic about as possible about what the world would look like in 50 years. So in 50 years, things aren't going well on Earth, but it's also not an apocalyptic event, right? So there's things like massive droughts, there's places that aren't getting enough food. Basically one of the first scenes is taking place in Chicago during a polar vortex, so it's freezing outside and everyone is still just going to the bar, right? And making it work. Because, I think life goes on in many ways. And I kind of chose to make it so that 50 years from now was kind of when the bottom completely fell out of the oil market. And I think some readers, early readers, were like, 50 years from now, aren't we going to be completely transitioned to clean energy like way earlier than that? And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I certainly feel, unfortunately, it does feel like that's more and more realistic, that it's going to take us more time, that there isn't the political will to do this in the next 5 to 10 years, and there will be serious environmental consequences. And so I think in a lot of ways, this book takes place at the cusp of a change in the environment. So if we don't do something now, uh, there is going to be a bigger disaster. And so a lot of this book is trying to focus on the characters are focused on kind of like how can we think about the next 100 years in the future and kind of where humanity will be then. And the solution they come up with is to move much of humanity to the moon and kind of preserve Earth's resources, which I leave ambiguous about whether or not that's a good idea. It's certainly something some folks believe that we could transition more of humanity to space. It wasn't an idea I came up with. But whether or not it's something that realistically could be done is an open question.
Well, it's difficult because when you say you want to move everyone to the moon to preserve Earth resources, there's also a large presumption that you need to take a bunch of those resources to the moon to sustain that population because
Yeah,
at least right now there's no growth on the moon. So how do you
yeah.
manage those?
Absolutely. And that's actually I love that you picked up on that because that's a central tension of the book. So the main antagonists are also environmentalists and they care very much about the future of Earth. And they believe that investing resources in sending folks to the moon is going to contribute to climate change. It's going to add more burning of rocket fuel. And they're also seeing what's happening about who has access to this, right? And it's elites, it's wealthy people. And there's this very tension of a moon hotel, right? Who is that for, right? It's for the same people that current space tourism is for. It's for wealthy elites. And so that's really problematic. And so I think in the book, there's kind of like a tension between, can we work within this system and kind of can we kind of leverage folks that are well resourced to kind of force change for folks that are less well resourced? Or does it really just need to get blown all up? Is this system so broken that it just needs to, be rubble, basically? And that's the tension, right, between our main characters and this kind of radical environmental group that they do turn out to be eco-terrorists, right? But I think I tried to make them really sympathetic, and I tried to read a lot of kind of writing by radical environmentalists who believe in violent forms of activism, and really understand kind of how do they talk, what do they believe in, and really try to make those characters kind of as lived in and believable as possible and human because I didn't want them to be just like pure villainy.
Well, I don't think that it works if it is pure villainy because, I mean, like at the end
Yeah.
of the day, we are all human, even the people who are making these drastic choices, and they're doing it because of a belief structure that they have based off of the information and the culture and the surroundings that they have. And so it's not just because they woke up one day, it's like, you know what? Let's blow something up. Like there's a
Yeah.
reason behind it. Been radicalized for a purpose and for a reason, and they're doing these actions because of that. And so I think the more you can understand why they're doing it, the more you can deconstruct, okay, how can we actually address this without blowing things up? How can we actually try to find a way around it? And so I think it helps create a more rounded story, and also it
Yes.
helps give more understanding for our current situations as well.
Absolutely. And as a reader, I think my favorite kind of books are ones where the antagonists are interesting and nuanced people and not just carbon copy villains. And so I think I certainly try to bring that to my own writing.
Well, when you are addressing this type of situation, it is something to be really careful about because there are people who might sit down and it's like, no, this is like, I need to blow something out. It's the only way to do it. How do you balance that while you're trying to make sure you're not completely justifying them to the point where, yes, you should blowing up something up is the answer, but also giving that empathy to why they're feeling that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the big I kind of introduce in one of my very first scenes Naveen, who is involved with the radical environmental group. And I really tried from the very beginning to make him kind of a real lived in person. And my main character Alex, I mean, she's having a relationship with him. She's sleeping with him. She enjoys their arguments, and I think it just sets him up very much as kind of like a well-rounded human from the very beginning. And then but I do think ultimately, not to go too far toward the end, but ultimately like the characters' choices, right, are what matters. And do they value human life, right? And I think that is ultimately what separates kind of the good guys from the bad guys in the end is kind of their choices and like how they try to go about achieving their goals.
Now, you said that you first got the idea to write this over a decade ago. Have you been writing it consistently throughout that decade, or were there other projects that you got involved in? Were there other things that caught your fancy?
Yeah, well, I had three children, so I think that's what
Congratulations.
that's what was taking up the bulk of my time. So I started Moonrising in before I had my first child. And I got like a few chapters in and I was like, I feel like there's something really exciting here. And I would try to fit it in when he was younger. I got a little bit done, and then I had twins, and they were kind of all consuming for several years. And so it wasn't until I believe they were four when I had a benefit from my job where I'd worked there for 8 years and I got a 10-week sabbatical, paid. And so I was like, and some people at my job, they went to Europe, or like, took a class. And what I did is I was like, I'm gonna just be a full-time writer for 10 weeks and see where it goes. And it ended up being, oh, as soon as this is my day job, I could just finish it, right? So I finished it in about 8 weeks, the first draft of Moonrising. So it took me 10 years to get like, kind of a messy half of a draft and then 8 weeks to kind of write a full draft. And so I think that I really learned in that time how to fit writing into my life. And it was extremely important to me to keep it going. And so now I write every single day. I can totally fit it into my life. I have kind of dedicated writing time every evening. And so I think I figured it out, but my kids needed to be old enough to be fairly independent for me to achieve that.
When you first sat down for those 8 weeks and you finally had the 8 weeks going, I mean, you had 10 years to really think about the book prior to that. Do you think that helped where you're just like, you already knew exactly what you wanted to do? You already had the ideas kind of fully formed. It was just a matter of writing it? Or at that point, were you still just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and going from
Yeah.
there?
So I think the real advantage is that the research.
Yeah.
So I have many scenes that take place in Abu Dhabi, and I dug really deep into the culture of the United Arab Emirates. And I had all of that research, many years of book research on that topic, kind of down and kind of recorded. And then I had many years of research on space travel. So I'd read many memoirs of astronauts and kind of their experience traveling into space. Their psychological experience. And that all kind of the research that really shines through in this novel was there. But I had too many ideas. I struggled with the idea of writing a plot arc, writing a character arc that was crisp, because I've been ruminating on this for so long. And so it was really reflected when I finished the first draft. It had too many things going on in it, and I was a little too close to it to see it. And so it took me finding my agent and getting, she did a revise and resubmit with me because she was like, I love your writing, I love these characters, but your plot arc doesn't work at all. And getting that feedback was so helpful to me. And I actually ended up kind of cutting about a third of the novel during that rewrite. And so I think I'm glad I went through that whole process. I'm glad I did the 10 years. But now, I'm learning I can write a book in a year because I know what I'm doing now, which is different than what it was before.
If you don't mind just lingering on this moment for a little bit longer, 'cause I think it's something that a lot of new writers struggle with adding too many plot parts, adding too many different tangential storylines. What specifically was it about the too much plot that you had to cut back on for other writers who might be struggling with that same feedback?
Yeah, definitely. So in my first draft, there were both eco-terrorists and there was a Russia plotline that was kind of based on some real kind of Russian mercenary group, the Wagner Group, which I was really interested in a couple years ago. And I kind of weaved them in. And so it ended up being there were a lot of there were two groups of antagonists kind of working together, too many. But the problem was that Alex, my main character, was like nowhere to be seen in all of this. She was like witnessing what was happening instead of taking action, instead of kind of learning from kind of the conflict. And so I realized that I needed to cut the Russians, which was like cutting a whole like my bad guy, cut my bad guy. And he was like a fully fleshed out bad guy. Like I felt good about him, but he had no relationship with Alex. Like it just didn't make sense. And instead, and this is something, you know, my agent, really helped me connect the dots is like your character arc, and your plot arc need to be very intertwined. And in Alex's case, you know, I made the main antagonist kind of somebody who, you know, a group that had kind of been a thorn in her side this whole time, right? That were kind of disagreed with her approach to science, that kind of had been threatening her. And also she'd been sleeping with one of them. And so she had this kind of relationship with one of them as well. And he betrays her. And so I think that just it just so much more clicked once I realized, oh, it needs to be about your characters, your main character specifically. And when I went back and was revising, I just every second I was like, how can Alex have more agency in this situation? How can she take more control? How can this be more about her character growth? So that was a huge aha moment for me.
I definitely think that's something that I hear a lot from different people at different career or different stages of their writing career rather, where they have so much that they want to convey and they know the world so well that they're like, oh yeah, this is happening over here and this is happening over here. And my character's, moving through their daily life, but the rest of the world is like falling apart. And I think it's almost because like we only live through our own eyes and we know that there's a war going on thousands of miles away and that's impacting the prices over here and that will eventually impact us. And so we want to, write about how the whole world is a whole thing and we're our main character, but we don't control everything. And it's a little bit different when you get into like the actual book because we're following the person. And so we really need to like focus on the person.
Absolutely. And I think what early writers get into a trap of is putting all that kind of backstory directly on the page. And so especially because I had done so much work researching Abu Dhabi, I had Mansour's family like really mapped out like all of these details and like then I put on the page and it was just like paragraphs and paragraphs of like telling. And I realized, oh, I can cut all of that. I could just cut all of that. It helps inform these characters and the conversations they have, but the reader doesn't need to know like much. They just need to know like a couple key pieces of information and like that's it.
I think it's a difference between like what the reader needs to know and then what you as the author needs to know so that informs how you write that character. Like you
Yeah.
can know that he has multiple siblings who have these types of interrelationships and that's how he's going to code switch between who he's talking to here or there, for instance. But the reader doesn't necessarily need to know all of those details.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You mentioned Abu Dhabi a few times. Why did you choose this particular place to spend so much time?
Yeah, so I was really inspired. This is in the very early days. I read about Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic signing like an MOU with folks in Abu Dhabi to launch space tourism ships from the Arabian Desert. And I was like, whoa, that is really interesting. And I started just reading more about the UAE, and I learned that they have a really ambitious space program. And they have, written plans about building a city on Mars. And since I started researching, they've launched a ship, like a probe, to the moon, which unfortunately did not land successfully. But they are one of the pretty few countries that have serious space ambitions. And so I got really interested in kind of their space program and then also just how interesting this country is. It's a very young country. It was, like Bedouin tribes. What, like 100 years ago. And since then, they have built these, glittering city states that are very wealthy. They've really invested a lot of this oil money into it. They're very science forward. They encourage women to get education, but they're also, in many ways, very traditional, very Muslim, and so I think it's a really interesting place. And when it comes to kind of sci-fi, I think I felt like, wow, it's so interesting to maybe fast forward 50 years for a country like this and kind of see where they are because they have made kind of leaps and bounds in 100 years. And so that's where I got started with the idea. And so I created a character, Mansoor, kind of as Alex's love interest. And originally the story starts from Alex's perspective. And, you know, as soon as I put him on the page, I was like, I want to know more about him. I want to know more about his background. And so he quickly became a point of view character, which just kind of fueled more research on kind of his background and his country.
When we first started planning for this interview, we had talked briefly about talking about writing outside of your lived experience. When you are writing characters like Mansoor, other members that are outside of your own lived experience, how do you go about doing that in a way that's empathetic to the real life circumstances of people who do have those lived experiences?
I think it's so important. So I believe, as a white writer, that I want to have a diverse cast of characters in my book. And so Alex is very close to my lived experience in many ways. she shares my kind of cultural background. She's also at University of Chicago, which is where I went to school. I'm a gardener. She's an agronomist, so there's just like a lot of connection there. And so Mansoor is extremely different, very much not in my lived experience at all. And I think for me, it was really important to, if I was going to go this way, I wanted to get it right. So I did a ton of research. And so what that looked like for me was I spent a lot of time at the Harold Washington Library, which is the primary library downtown Chicago. And kind of, I read every single book on Abu Dhabi and the UAE that I could find. And, there weren't that many, right? So I really did like clean out their library, reading that. Um, I also, just because, again, this was like a 10-year process, I had just opportunities to, there was a mosque, like walking distance from my house that I had an opportunity to visit when they were having an open house and kind of, just more immerse myself in kind of a culture that's different than my own. And I think I also, I have a lot of friends kind of from various, Muslim backgrounds and just kind of paying attention to kind of how, how different folks kind of interact with this cultural background in different ways, right? And kind of just letting that inform me, right? That there just isn't a monolith for any culture. And certainly, I think I was interested in kind of absorbing different things. So that I did all that, and I think something that I kind of realized early on was that if I have a character who's Emirati who's going to fall in love with a white woman. He's probably not going to be like super traditional, right? And so like, where's his boundaries? And how does he feel about his own faith, his own cultural background? And so what I ended up having him do was uh, really be like an expert code switcher, right? And so he lives in America. He's appears very Western in many ways, and then he goes home to Abu Dhabi, and he is very, much a traditional Emirati. He cares very much about his father's opinion and kind of acts in the ways that his father would expect, and that's extremely important to him. And that actually ended up being his big character arc was how to kind of reconcile these two divided selves. And then I also kind of to bring him to life, I gave him a brother, Rashid. And Rashid is probably, it's he's one of my favorite characters. And Rashid left Abu Dhabi when he was 18 to go to college in the States, and he kind of never looked back. And we find out very quickly that he's gay, and it's currently illegal to be gay in Abu Dhabi, and you can be subject to prison. And my future world, that is still the case. And so it makes sense, right? He does not feel safe. In his home country. He just straight up does not feel safe. And but the way he expresses it is with kind of disdain and just like needling Mansoor for being such like a good son, always caring about impressing his father, and so I think the two of them having their relationship together really helped kind of bring out both of these characters. Um, and I think whenever you're writing kind of outside of kind of your lived experience and I think it's important not to stereotype. And I think in many ways it was easy not to stereotype because I have like a dozen Emirati characters. And so they're all different, right? They all have different values, different views, different relationships with the West. And that all comes out. So I think it involved just a lot of care. And I think it probably helps. I'm married to a Black man. We've been in a relationship for 20 years. And so I think even though his culture is completely different than Mansoor's, it makes me kind of really aware of kind of how much my own cultural lens influences how I see the world. Like my husband and I will process the same experience different ways, right? Because of our different cultural backgrounds. We'll definitely process different news stories in different ways. And so I think that just helps keep me like humble and kind of like self-aware of like how much of my experience going through the world is because of my kind of lens as like, a white middle class cis woman. So I think that helped. too. Um, and then I think we're going to talk next about the process of finding a sensitivity reader, which is like the next
Yeah.
step for me.
Yeah. Were you able to engage with that and actually work with a sensitivity reader? And how would you find one if you don't know how that process goes?
Yeah, yeah. So I knew kind of with this book, it was like top priority, right? I had written an entire point of view character that was very different from my own background, and I it was extremely important to get it right. So I actually I did a lot of research on the internet, just like sensitivity readers that were available, and I really lucked out. I found someone on Fiverr who she's Egyptian, so she lives in Egypt, and she's a biologist too, so she's a scientist. So she had that background, and I kind of reached out to her, and I was like, I've got this setting in Abu Dhabi. Do you feel comfortable kind of giving a sensitivity read on this? I know you're Egyptian, and she said yes. She felt like she has a lot of relationships with folks from the Gulf and from the United Arab Emirates, and she could could do that. And so I sent her the draft like right before I went to query agents. I sent her the draft, so she was like kind of my final check. And she was really great. She it was interesting, right? Because I think she did a lot of things that were validating. So, for example, and I didn't write anything that took place in Abu Dhabi that wasn't something I read somewhere, right? I didn't extrapolate as much as I could. And so I had a scene in the beginning where they're on a plane ride, and women start going to the bathroom to kind of change clothes to assume more traditional dress before they land. They're flying from Boston to Abu Dhabi, and she said, I've seen this, right? Like I see this, like this is real, and I feel like that was just like cool to be like, okay, I didn't make it up in my own head. I'd read it somewhere, but like I just to get that validation. But she had probably the most notes for me on my women characters. I think, and again, this is like my lens, right? As a white American woman, I thought I was writing them like modest, but I was missing the mark. So she had me change things like I had a female, the ambassador's wife. She was in DC, and she kind of like turns her kiss up to be her cheek to be kissed at one point. And she was like, no, she would never do that. That would not be a thing. She would not touch a man. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you. And I had another scene with a different character who I had described as as more traditional. And she went and visited Mansour at his house. And I had the scene take place in his bedroom. And I did have like the door open. I had a third person there. I thought I had like covered my bases. And she was like, no, this character would never ever go into a man's bedroom. Like that just would not happen. And so I like reworked the scene. I made it in a courtyard outside, and and it's still I portrayed it as like kind of a bold thing she did, but like it was more um within the realm of possibility. And so I think
Right.
it was just really helpful. And I tried to every single thing she said, I did listen to, right? I really like wanted to kind of respect her expertise, right? And I think she was really helpful. And I actually did two rounds with her. So I did one round before I went on querying. And it was helpful because I was able to tell my agent, Jenna, that I had engaged a sensitivity reader, and she was happy that I had done that so early in the process. And then when Jenna and I started working together, and we finalized the version that went on sub to editors. Before I went on sub to editors, I sent my sensitivity reader those like additional scenes that I had written, and just got like one more check. So yeah, and I think she was just like extremely helpful. And I would, highly recommend. I think actually, I think it's an essential part of the process. When you're really writing outside your culture, like I was doing.
For those of us who may not be very familiar with it, what exactly is Fiverr?
Oh, sure. It's a one of those sites where you can just hire someone for kind of a gig work.
Okay.
And so in this case, Fiverr, folks that do more editing services usually charge by the word count. And so for the sensitivity reader, she kind of like charged a different amount for each 10,000 words that she was reviewing. And then you just kind of communicate completely through the site, and you pay through the site. So like your payment is secure and you don't, you like check that you're satisfied with the work before the payment is fully processed. So it kind of protects you as well. It was a really good experience. I'd recommend it again.
So when you go on the website, do you search, for instance, sensitivity reader, or do you put your own advertisement saying, I'm looking for a sensitivity reader? How does it actually work for the
Yeah,
practicality purposes?
I at least for what I did is I searched for sensitivity reader. There's a lot out there. There's less when it fo comes to focus on like kind of Middle Eastern sensitivity reads. There's only a couple out there, but I think LGBTQ sensitivity readers, Black sensitivity readers, you see like a lot. There's quite a lot of services out there for that. So, and then they display their prices, and there's like there's reviews. You can see like who else they worked with, and so it's like a very transparent site. That it made it pretty easy.
So you said that you got a revise and resubmit with your agent. I assume that the agent that you have now is the one who gave you the revise and resubmit.
Yes.
What was that process like? Like when you first got the revise and resubmit, I know some people, you get the email and it's you either can accept that you're going to be doing the revisions or you reject the revisions and say, no, this is my document. Why did you feel like the revisions were good and that you should go forward with doing the revisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so Jenna sent me a lengthy email with her thoughts. It wasn't just like some revise and resubmits are very casual. This one was not. And it was very clear that she loved the characters and loved my writing. I think there was a lot of care in that. But she also was like, part of the reason I'm not ready to represent you is I just don't know how to fix it. Like, I don't know, like, there's a problem here. I can identify the problem, but I can't really identify the solution. And she offered to take a phone call with me. And so I obviously took her up on that. And so I had about a week to kind of marinate on her suggestions. And so I had this idea of cutting the Russians and like focusing on the eco-terrorist plotline kind of immediately. By the time I got on the phone call with her, I'd like fleshed that out in my head. Um, so that was really helpful. And then we kind of had a wild situation where we got on the phone. I knew she was in Chicago. She knew I was in Chicago. She kind of assumed I was on the South Side in Hyde Park because that's where my book takes place. And we realized we live walking distance from one another. And I queried her on the internet, right? Like she has people from all over the world. We realized we were neighbors. Our kids play at the same park. We have a very close mutual friend we had both seen that week. So it was just ended up being this like bond, right? We just like really liked each other. We were just both floored by this coincidence. I mean, this is an international business and we can walk to each other's houses. So then once we started talking about revisions, it was just like we already were just like bonded. And she loved my ideas. And she kind of like helped me refine them. It ended up being this like really wonderful, like 45-minute call. And then I just sat down and wrote, and it just flew. It was so fun. I just felt like, and again, I was cutting about a third of my book, and I loved it. It was fantastic. I felt finally like I understood what my problem was, like why it wasn't working quite right, like how to make it better. And I just like flew through those revisions, and like 3 weeks later, I sent her the new version, and I said something to her like, even if this doesn't work out, like you have changed my life. Like this book is so much better now. Like thank you. And she read it pretty quickly and she offered me representation and she said, look, it still needs more work. Like we're not done. Like this is not perfect, but like I'm ready to represent you and do this work together because I can see we make a good team. I can see you take like feedback really well. Not everybody is capable of that. And so when she offered me rep, I just was like, yes, like you're supposed to like reach out to everyone else who like you have a query out with and like give them a chance to offer you rep too. And I was like, I don't need that. This is my person. Like, not only do we have this crazy neighborhood connection, we just really, really click. And I've done work with her now. I did these 3 weeks of revisions and they were fantastic. And so we just kept working together. And she just really helped me level up. She was really, really clear with what I needed to focus on and how to do it. And it was, I mean, it's been just life changing. Like she just, like any, if every writer could have someone so helpful to them in terms of like telling them what they need to improve on, I think it would just be, it was the best experience. And it continues to be the best experience. So I'm really thrilled with how all that worked out.
That's fantastic. Honestly, like I think finding that agent that really gets you is such a huge part of the process. There are so many agents out there, and yes, it's fantastic to get matched with any agent, but like finding that one that really just understands you and knows your book and knows your direction is like such a great part of the process where you can just, that's where you can
Absolutely.
fly. When you went on your submission process, what was your relationship with, well, first off, I guess in the submission process, when you got your offer, what made you decide that that was the editor that you wanted to work with?
Yeah. So I was really pleased with kind of the offer I got from Diversion Books. It was a 2 book deal, which was really exciting. And they really liked my concept for my second book, which is a also a science fiction romance, but it's a different universe. And I was kind of excited to be part of their kind of first fiction lineup. So they've been they're a very established kind of independent publisher, but they've been focused on nonfiction for a while. And so my editor, Toni Kilpatrick, she kind of was hired to build up their fiction line. And so she was very excited to kind of work with me, pull in those marketing resources. They had just announced a distribution deal with Simon and Schuster, which was really exciting. So it felt like even though this is an independent press, this felt like a really established one. And like they have books in airports and stuff, nonfiction, but like they know what they're doing. And I think I also just she really loved the characters and the story, and I feel like her kind of love for that shone through as well. And so I've been really happy with Diversion. And yeah, I'm kind of excited to continue to work with them on this book too as well.
I know you can't talk much about book two because that's the way publishing is. But when you do have those contracts for second book deals, stuff like that, for people who aren't aware of how that process works, what does that look like as far as like when you're making that decision of signing a 2 book deal where they're not
Yeah,
necessarily tied together?
yeah, I think it's a little scary, especially because so for me, right, I had taken 10 years to write draft one of Moon Rising. And so we were like, can I do a second book with
There's
a
always that
tentative
fear.
publication date, right? It's because tentatively scheduled for publication next summer. And I hadn't written that much of it, I'd written like 10,000 words of it. So I think in my case, and every case is different, I had the concept kind of written out in a paragraph, and my editor had asked some follow-up questions, and that was it, right? And she did not ask to be part of like the like step-by-step process. Some editors with that second book, they want to see an outline, they want to have more input into every stage. And so I think I really appreciated, right, that I kind of like had more independence, but of course, there's many ways to do it. So, um in my case, I think I treated it similar to my first book. I kind of knew I had a deadline. I actually turned it in 3 months before my deadline.
Good
So I
job.
it's with my editor now, but she has not had a chance to read it yet. So, So we will see kind of like, what feedback she has. But I'm really proud of it. And one of the most exciting parts was that I sent it to Jenna, and you remember we had like so much work on Moonrising, and she read it and she literally said, "This is perfect." She's like, "I don't have any developmental edits." She's like, "You learned so much, like you've leveled up your craft so much." And that was just like the coolest thing. I was so excited. So I think I feel like I've cracked the code on how to write for myself and keep a full-time job and raise three kids. And it's really exciting to kind of feel that way. But in terms of like a two-book deal, I think it is a contract, right? You are obligated to write that second book. There's money attached, so there's deadlines attached. So I think I know myself, and I know that I'm not scared of deadlines. I'm very capable of working within a deadline. I'm an operations person, like it's all about project management and deadlines. Like that part's easy. So I think if you're considering a second book, your two-book deal, you really have to like have that self-awareness to be sure that you can do it. And I think for me, it was important not to send my editor like a first draft, right? So the version I sent her was draft like three. And so I think, I built in time to have beta readers and like really get it to the point where when I sent it to Jenna, like it was really, really polished. And I built in time to like work with Jenna on revisions, and she was like, actually, you can just send it right to Tony, which was exciting. So that's where it's at right now. Yeah, but I can say kind of a sentence or two about it, which is that it's a Pride and Prejudice inspired story that takes place on Mars, and it's got like Bridgerton vibes, but it's
Very
also
cool.
really feminist, and like really empowering, and I'm really excited about it, and I think it's gonna like land really well a year and a half from now if all goes well. So I'm excited about it.
Well, I wish you luck because that sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
Before we head out today, I just wanted to ask one final question, which is there any advice you can give to people who are dealing with that code issue of how to juggle the full-time job, the life expectations, the deadline coming, the writing career they want to have all at once? Like, what would you suggest to those people who are just really struggling at that?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think it's really important to remember this is a marathon. Every piece is slow, and rejection happens at every stage of the process. Even really established writers experience rejection. So you have to find a way to be cool with rejection. In terms of the actual just like logistics of getting it done, I think it's important to find a routine that works for you, and everyone's routine is different. What I have found is that I can drink a coffee at 4 p.m. and then I have enough energy to write from like when my kids are in bed, so like 8:39 until like around 11 at night, right? And so I write for 2 hours every day. And if I can squeeze in more time, great. But like that's when I really get a lot done. And that for me, that meant I don't watch TV, right? I used to watch TV during those 2 hours, and now I have given that up, right? And so I think um, it's finding kind of what works for you. Everybody's different, everyone's schedules are different. And then I think it's really about being open to feedback, not getting defensive, not thinking of your work as precious. Um, I got where I am today because I cut out an antagonist. I cut a third of my book, right? Um, if I had been to like, no, this is my precious baby, I'm not going to change it, I probably would not have a publication deal. So I think it's really, really important to be okay with killing your darlings and just kind of continuing to make it better. Um, and I kind of believe my best days are yet to come, right? Like I'm really excited about the third book I'm drafting, right? Like I think like every book is different, it gets better. And I think you shouldn't ever feel like the first thing you do is the be all end all, right? Like you should just keep writing, keep building new worlds and kind of see where it takes you.
Thank you again for joining us today in this episode of Lindsay Bird in Writing is Hard. You can find more details about Claire and her book, Moonrising, in the episode description. As a reminder, her book is out on July 8th, 2025, and pre-ordering is now available for those of you who are interested. If you like this content and would like more, please do like and subscribe and share it with those who might be interested too. We hope to see you next time, and as always, stay happy and healthy. Bye for now.